All right. On behalf of CFAR, let me thank everyone for joining us today. We're really excited for today's talk and having an audience of like-minded searchers and researchers and practitioners to join in the discussion about these ideas is really powerful for us. The work that we do is really made possible through a lot of voluntary collaboration, and we're excited to share the results of some of our work from last year with you. I'm sure you all know this, but bear with me as I tell you a little bit about the CFAR Alliance and then about our call and our panelists on today's call. The CFAR Alliance, the Climate Innovation for Adaptation and Resilience Alliance, is dedicated to advancing innovative climate solutions for vulnerable people on the planet. We are committed to promoting equity and inclusivity by addressing the needs of those who are most affected by climate change, focused on low-income populations. In our first year, the CARMET CoLab, or a working group for metrics and measurements to advance climate adaptation and resilience, our members voiced an acute need to identify better metrics. Metrics are a critical quantitative language for results and impact in the climate adaptation and resilience space. The problem is particularly acute for founders and for whose services support micro and small enterprises, smallholder farmers, and other low resource environments. We believe that better metrics will facilitate more rapid investments and better alignment of incentives for impact investors and for founders. To be successful, metrics need to be simple, feasible, and scalable without sacrificing quality or relevance to get there. And today, there are many valuable frameworks that address a multitude of goals related to climate resilience, and we remain engaged in a process of continuous learning about this space. So that's a bit about the Alliance that's on the screen right now. You can see the Alliance members and the logos from the About the Alliance page. And the CARMET CoLab is just one of a number of collabs or working groups that are addressing critical problems in this space. On today's call, I'm joined by a distinguished group of panelists. Marco Del Rio, excuse me for flipping my pages, is a purpose-driven development economist with 18 years of experience in digital financial services, financial inclusion, financial health, rural financing, MSE resilience, and social development. He's led high-impact projects in collaboration with senior-level government officials, donors, and the private sector. Since 2022, he has worked as a senior consultant in financial services at BFA Global, where he is acting director of Strive Mexico, a program founded by the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth that aims to increase resilience for 90,000 micro and small enterprises, and FinSalud, a program focused on improving financial health in Mexico. He has been the co-lead of the CARMET CoLab at CFAR Alliance. Simone Schwal is an entrepreneur and micro insurance expert, initially working as a consultant in the field of mobile financial services, but working in particular for the GSMA. Simone then spent 4 years at BIMA as a leader in health and life microinsurance, working in Papua New Guinea, Senegal, and Egypt. Observing the lack of insurance solutions for farmers, Simone then founded OCO, which offers parametric climate insurance to smallholder farmers in Africa. OCO is now active in multiple countries in sub-Saharan Africa and has insured more than 27,000 farmers to date. OCO established major partnerships with Orange and Allianz and is ranked among the prestigious Inclusive FinTech 50, and Simone was listed as one of the 10 FinTech entrepreneurs to watch by Jeune Afrique. Patrick Nussbaumer is a program officer at UNIDO, where he works to conceptualize, identify, develop, and deploy innovative finance instruments and programmatic partnerships with the private sector and international financial institutions to catalyze and leverage investments in sustainable industrial development in line with the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreements, and to create partnerships with financial institutions and specialized fund managers to design and establish innovative funding mechanisms. Malika Anand is head of impact and ESG for Catalyst Fund. She leads Catalyst Fund's investment theses, research, and ESG and impact reporting. She also leads the fund's ecosystem learning and research efforts to contribute to knowledge for the sector more broadly. At BFA Global, she leads learning functions for programs in inclusive fintech, digital commerce, job tech, platform work, assistive tech, and gender strategy. She also serves as senior consultant to CGAP's carbon markets and MSE teams, leading production of insights and content. My name is Ben Mazzotta. I'm a senior social science researcher at BFA Global. where I lead research in financial health across multiple geographies, including Africa, Latin America, and Asia. I served on a working group for financial health at the Office of the United Nations Secretary General's Special Advocate for Inclusive Financial Development, where I co-authored a technical note on measurement, and I've been a co-lead along with Patrick, with Marco, and with Rashmi, who I hope is on today's call, for the CARMET CoLab at CIFAR. With that, we're going to discuss two new publications that I'm very excited to share with you. I hope you had a chance to read them already, and that you might be coming with a little bit of background and some questions for the authors of these publications. But recently, the CARMET CoLab has created these new publications: a benchmark analysis of frameworks for measuring climate resilience and adaptation with 10 principles for measuring resilience and adaptation based on a review of 30 different measurement frameworks. And our first case study, what we hope will be a long series, impact investments in climate resilient drought insurance. CARMET CoLab case study number 1 with our founder on the call today, Simone Schwal. And the goal of those case studies is to look at ways that specific investments have adopted some of the metrics that show up on the benchmark analysis of frameworks and use that to facilitate investment transactions. It was a very, very long introduction, so thank you for putting up with me today. Welcome to all of our audience members. Welcome to our panelists. And with that, let me dive right in and ask whether I can have Marco Del Rio tell us a little bit about the report that you generated. Marco, the report emphasizes the role of micro, small, and medium enterprises in climate resilience. What are some key challenges that enterprises face in that context?
Thank you so much, Ben. I'm glad to be here, and welcome everybody. So let me just start by saying how MSMEs contribute to climate resilience, and they do so in many ways. MSMEs are important because they often lead in innovation, adaptive technologies and practices, because their size allows them for agility and flexibility in developing and implementing solutions. And those solutions can be tailored to local climate challenges. They also are closely integrated within communities, so they are really well positioned to engage in grassroots level education and mobilization around climate change. They can contribute significantly to economic resilience by diversifying local economies, which is crucial in areas affected by climate change. They can also adopt sustainable practice, right? And that can translate in turn into enhance the resilience of the whole supply chain to climate-related disruptions. They're important because they serve as a valuable data source on local climate impacts and to assess whether policies are being effective, right? And finally, they collectively influence policies by advocating for climate resilience measurements and ensuring their needs and potential contributions to a broader climate action plans. And yes, how they face significant challenges in measuring and communicating their impact on climate resilience. And this difficulty primarily arises from the complexity of climate resilience concept, which covers a wide range of hazard types, socioeconomic circumstances, unit of analysis, just to name a few. And in addition to that, existing tools and metrics require substantial expertise and investment beyond most MSMEs reach, making it really hard to document their impact on climate adaptation and resilience. And climate change metrics traditionally are being developed for large corporations and projects, and then they tend to be complicated or expensive to be used by MSMEs. And lastly, MSMEs may operate in niche market or regions and limiting their visibility compared to larger enterprises with global reach. And just to a last comment is that it's important to understand that new companies often face more significant problems than the existing ones.
I think that's really fascinating. I appreciate that you've pointed out a couple of issues that I didn't really get to in the introduction. Number one is that in addition to facilitating transactions between impact investors and founders and the MSMEs that those businesses might ultimately serve, there's really an important policy dimension here. And there might be a blind spot in our policy analyses because the best frameworks, if they're expensive to implement or they require specialized expertise, you could see an expertise gap or an investment gap in measurement itself. And therefore, the policy community might be systematically blind to the impacts on resilience of businesses and their customers that are under-resourced. So low resource settings might be a policy blind spot, and that's important to acknowledge here. I really appreciate that idea. In the report, you've identified 10 key patterns for measuring adaptation and resilience. Could you speak a little bit more about some of those patterns and the significance of those patterns for this audience?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm just want to acknowledge that this report was a collaborative effort, co-authored by myself and by you, Rashmi, and Patrick, and the report received significant contributions from the working group members. And just being mindful of the time, I will mention only a few of them. And I mean, I'll start by mentioning a common pattern, which is the need to understand the impact on end users. So outcome assessment predominantly focuses on the beneficiaries, quantifying either the number of individuals positively affected or the capabilities enhanced by the project. So many frameworks, including the Race Resilience Metrics frameworks and the Adaptation Fund, incorporate these metrics related to individuals, communities, companies that are being benefit directly or indirectly. And some frameworks analyze the responses by which the target population enhance their capabilities to deal with identified shocks and stresses, that is, those that help to prevent or reduce or the exposure to a shock or stress, help them to prepare for anticipate shock of stress, or help them to act when those shocks and stresses occur. Another pattern is the usage of qualitative and quantitative metrics to assess. And the complementarity of divergence of qualitative and quantitative assessments is a recurring theme among the frameworks. Some frameworks like the Waterfront Edge design guidelines are primarily qualitative, while others like the Climate Risk Toolkit provide a more quantitative approach. So based on the above, I will try to mention the implication for MSCs to prove effects is to be ready and start thinking on how to put systems in place to track both quantitative and quantitative impact on their initiatives. And let's say for quantitative data, focus on metrics like number of people served, income increase, and reduction or in resource usage. And for the qualitative impact, gather testimonials, case studies, and feedback from the community. And MSMEs can also consider partnering with academic institutions or consultancy firms for independent assessment. And lastly, they can leverage technology like mobile apps or online platforms to collect and analyze data efficiently. And for the investor community, I would advocate appreciating the value of qualitative data in understanding MSC's real-world impact, because it's not just about the numbers, but also the stories and the experiences behind them.
Such a powerful set of ideas that partnerships and technology can help us overcome some of the intrinsic difficulties, challenges, and barriers to better measurement. That can really move the needle on more qualitative metrics that tell us about the depth of resilience. So thank you, Marco, for presenting on behalf of co-authors for the CARMET CoLab in general. I know a lot of stakeholders were engaged in the research that created that report, and we'll certainly have question and answers for you at the end. If participants in the webinar have thoughts for Marco, anything that you'd like to ask, please drop those in the chat and we'll come to those at the end of the hour. For now, let's turn to Simone for a few minutes. Simone, I wonder if you could perhaps tell me, for those that don't know, what is drought insurance and how does it facilitate climate adaptation and resilience?
Sure. So climate insurance, because it's not only drought, it can also be floods, it can be extreme temperatures. So climate insurance, it can also be called weather index insurance or parametric weather insurance. They are basically the same thing. The idea is to identify the weather conditions that are detrimental to farming activities, such as low rain, excessive rain, extreme temperatures, windstorms. So there are indicators that are then measured during the season, such as humidity, soil moisture, wind speed, or more. And if these indicators reach a predetermined threshold, an indemnity is automatically paid to the insured farmers. So it's really automating the process of insurance, of claim verification, using satellite data to automate payment of claims and to reduce the cost of insurance. It simplifies the claim validation process. It's also more transparent, and it can be performed remotely, which are key elements to make it more accessible to new populations that were not covered before. So this suddenly means that any farm can be covered, even if they are a small farm and they are hard to reach. So how does it relate to adaptation and resilience? Well, for resilience, it's pretty straightforward. There's about 500 million smallholder farmers globally, smallholder farms, more precisely, and they're exposed to climate risks. They're often just one crop failure away from falling back into poverty. They have no crop insurance and no other financial safety nets. So providing them with an alternative source of income when their harvest fails is a way to ensure that they will not go bankrupt, that they will not have to sell their land or their production tools to prepare the next season, possibly that they will be able to repay their loan, and that they will have the means to buy seeds, fertilizers, and tools to prepare the next season. So that's how it helps resilience, really basically helping them go back on their feet after a difficult season. Now, when it comes to climate adaptation, it's not as direct, but climate insurance is also part of climate adaptation, as farmers need to change the way they farm. They need to adopt new varieties, new techniques, and this comes with risks. For example, we work with farmers that are early adopters of direct seeded rice that doesn't need to be flooded. So it saves a lot of water, it emits less methane, but it's exposed to the risk of failed germination if rainfall is insufficient or because of other weed infestations. So we bundle insurance with we bundle a germination insurance with the seeds to reduce the risk for them to adopt these new seeds. So it can play a part too in climate adaptation as well.
So powerful. So we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about the insurance technology itself, how it lowers costs and expands access. We've talked about the farmer's problem and what are the impacts of adverse events on harvests for their future productivity and how that affects decision-making today. And we've even talked about the linkages between how insurance is deployed in the specific agriculture technologies that we see in the field. So there's these linkages between financial design and real world agriculture practices. With all that complexity, how did you decide on a reporting framework for adaptation and resilience that's related to your quarterly or annual results?
So creating a positive impact is at the core of our project at OCOR. That's quite clear. So we always made efforts to measure our positive outcome of our work. But we quickly realized that if we want to attract investment from impact investors, we need to structure it in a way that works for them. At first, we were just filling the whatever forms they were asking us to fill in, but we got a bit smarter about it. We got trained through different accelerators, including Catapult Africa, and we learned to use frameworks like the theory of change and adapt our tools to make monthly and yearly impact reporting easier. So yeah, it was kind of not even a decision, but early on we knew that we had to measure impact because that was the core of the project. And then by interacting with different experts and also with investors, we realized that we need to track it to be credible when we talk to them. We need to track to structure it to make it easier for us to report. And I think now it's at the core of every impact startup to adopt some kind of framework and to report on their impact.
Do you think, this is a little bit of a leading question, so do you think that it does, and how do you think that these metrics align incentives for impact investors and founders like yourself?
So sometimes it feels like it's a big burden, and as founders, we are really focused on creating, on building our company. So initially, it may look like it's not completely aligned. Like impact investors wants to see a lot of metrics on a regular basis, and it can take a lot of time to create them, while you want to focus on building and growing your company, right? But it's in the end, it's important. It's a necessary evil or necessary pain to organize yourself, because then you can have simpler discussions with investors, save a lot of time and effort. It also helps us materialize our ambition. That's good for the investors, because they don't want to just to hear that yes, you want to do good, but they want to see how this materializes, how this can be measured. They need actual figures more than commitments, and it helps also us as founders to not lose track of our ambition and make sure we're on the right track. And also it helps us. It doesn't only serve the investors, but also some potential clients, like the sustainability arm of large companies, NGOs, development organizations. So we work with those kind of companies, and they also need reporting. So some of this framework can also help to be credible to these clients and provide them reporting efficiently.
Right. That's an interesting response. Not exactly a full-throated defense of this, but it sounds like the benefits are there once the attention has been paid and the investment has been made in the reporting systems themselves, that it really does advance the conversation with funders and really help clarify for them what's being accomplished on the ground in a powerful way. Let me take this public moment to just say thank you for how responsive you've been as we created this case study together, the doors that you've opened, and the ways that you've been able to shine a light on the different flavors of information that went into creating this case study. I hope it wasn't too much of a burden or a distraction from your good work as we created that together. Let me turn now to Patrick and ask you a couple of questions, if I may. Patrick, in what ways does UNIDO support private sector development in the face of climate challenges?
Thank you very much, Ben, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be here. I'm grateful to PFA Global colleagues and CIFA in particular to create a platform for us to share the insights that we have gathered in the context of this working group, trying to turn every stone that we could find to create a better understanding of climate adaptation and resilience metrics. So happy to have this with you and share some insights, but also shed light on our role as UNIDO vis-a-vis impact investing, and in particular supporting the deployment of solutions that are creating an impact on climate adaptation and resilience. So Ben, to your question, what is it we're doing to support the private sector development? So given UNIDO's mandate as a specialized agency focusing on industry, we place a particular emphasis on private sector development, and SMEs, as we know, and as Marco mentioned, are commonly the backbone of many economies in frontier markets. Not only that, but also collectively, if we are able to work with those, they have the potential to create deep impact, but not only deep impact, but also long-lasting impact, because they are locally based, because they are integrated into local economies. So from our side, we do work with and through SMEs, small and medium enterprises in those markets, and we like to work with them as an agent of change to create that positive impact that we are trying to achieve. We are active across different sectors and verticals, including, but also increasingly so, in climate adaptation and resilience. So concretely, through our programs, we design and deploy bespoke services to support those companies to deploy their goods, their services, and the intelligence that they put to the market so that the risk to climate change can be reduced. So we select companies like OCO on the basis of the ability of whatever they put on the market to reduce the climate hazard and or reduce the exposure to that climate hazard and or reduce the vulnerability to that exposure. So in the case of OCO, we're talking about the vulnerability to that exposure to the climate hazards. 4 lines of services, briefly to illustrate this, we support innovation. So we run accelerators in different countries, different regions. So we go to the market, identify promising innovation, promising products and services, and we work with them to navigate that difficult, delicate process of moving away from the publicly funded R&D through friends and family as a source of funding to private sector financing, that big gap we're trying to bridge by providing our services on acceleration, which includes de-risking services, but also early stage financing. What we also do is to do business acceleration. So we help company access the financing that they are looking for so that they can grow, be better, and create more impact. So we groom those companies, we provide the advice that they require, and then make targeted introduction to prospective investors. What we also do is to design and implement innovative finance schemes. Notably, we are putting together a blended finance structure that is specifically targeted to supporting companies that are making an impact on climate adaptation. Noteworthy is to mention that we are implementing those programs either directly, so we interact with the company or through partners. And in the letter, we just want to mention the collaboration that we have with BFA Global in the context of the Catalyst Fund, whereby we are accelerating innovation on climate adaptation with fintech-enabled business model. For all of this, Ben and colleagues, we are mobilizing resources from providers of concessional capital, bilateral donors, multilateral funds, and our role is to deploy those resources in a way that is catalytic, but also in a way that maximizes the impact. And that is precisely, colleagues, that is precisely what triggered to some extent frustration on my side, but also triggered the work on metrics. We do need to have better tools than what we have to inform decision on capital allocation. So how can I maximize impact? I do need to have a sense for what the impact of OCO might be so that I can make an informed decision on supporting OCO or another company. So aside from the 4 lines of services, we're also generating and producing leadership. The landscape review that Marco presented at the beginning is the start of the journey for us. We are committed to pursue this work, and in fact, we have just raised funding to pursue that work and have kick-started the next step on metrics at the climate conference just last year in Dubai.
That is a really powerful set of ideas, all the different ways that you support private sector development. It sort of got to the next question that I had written down, which is to learn more about the linkages between private sector development and promoting climate adaptation and resilience. But I think the ideas that you just landed on at the end are maybe the most interesting ones of all, in terms of how specifically you see this work on better metrics, more comprehensive metrics, more feasible and scalable metrics as improving capital allocation. Can you explain for those who maybe aren't in the investment world but are coming from the founder side, what does that look like on the other side of the table in the world of innovative and blended finance instruments?
So we, as Simon explained, we do need to have those companies able to articulate the impact that they might make in order for them to become eligible for climate finance and impact finance. So that is something that is very important. in interacting with those companies, we feel that there is a deficit in the capacity, and there is a role for institutions like ours to work with companies to build that capacity and provide the tools that they need to be able to work with this elusive concept that is climate adaptation. No? So that is one aspect. Now, I understand Simon's point that this is, to some extent perceived as a burden, coming from something additional to the, the daily business. My experience in interacting with businesses around metrics for climate adaptation is that by building that capacity, it also allows the businesses to be more aware of the risk that their business is facing. I had a number of aha moments interacting and trying to dig a little deeper on metrics around climate adaptation. The companies are able to understand the climate hazards that they face, not only the company, their services, but also their supply chain. So they can look at upstream and downstream. And I think that capacity building is also very important from a business development perspective. So back to the start, Ben and colleagues, absolutely critical that we as a community become better and more effective, Simon, in being able to articulate and quantify the impact that those companies make.
Well, you've been a longstanding partner in the co-leadership of our co-lab. Everything at the CFAR Alliance is always first and foremost collaborative. And it's a really interesting body of work that you've been able to share from your perspective at UNIDO, certainly different from the founder's perspective. Let me turn to Malika for just a couple of moments, and then we'll open the floor for questions. If the audience are having thoughts, things you'd like to ask, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll get to them as soon as a few more minutes have passed. Malika, in your work at the Catalyst Fund, how do you see how climate resilient startups reporting their impact to attract and effectively utilize investment?
Thanks so much, Ben, and thanks for having me. It's really fun to see so many friends in the audience, and I know that many of them will have different and really interesting answers to contribute to this question. I think in our case, much as Simon kind of already articulated, we see a lot of underlying motivation and commitment to impact, but sort of confusion and struggles to think about how to set up accurate and reliable reporting structures, right, that can be used over time. And I think that stems from a bunch of reasons. One is something that Marco already talked about, which is just the plethora, the sort of multiplication of adaptation and resilience frameworks out there. I think for Marco's paper, you guys reviewed something on the order of 25 frameworks in what is, at the end of the day, sort of a new sector. And if you're a founder trying to build your business, as Simon mentioned, how you navigate those 25 frameworks, how you decide what makes sense for you, can be a challenge. I think on top of that, many of those frameworks are sort of trickle-down frameworks from European type taxonomies and frameworks that struggle to be relevant and pragmatic in emerging markets that we're talking about. And that pragmatism, the problem with pragmatism, I think, extends also to a stage fit problem. So a lot of those frameworks are really developed from a kind of ESG, EU taxonomy framework where you're thinking about Fortune 500 companies with huge user bases. And if you're an early stage startup or even a growth stage startup, figuring out how to make those relevant for your work can be a challenge. And then finally, I would add the who pays for it problem. And I know many folks in the audience, we've commiserated about this time and time again, which is, setting these systems up is an investment, and it's a very worthwhile investment. And, we've seen the startups that have had, in most cases, philanthropic help to get those systems set up in the beginning benefit from them over time, both in their product development, but also in their reporting and their ability to have frank and really intentional conversations with their investors and their stakeholders. But getting those systems in place in the beginning is an investment. And when you're bootstrapping or when you have 6 months of runway, 10 months of runway, 18 months of runway, you have to make really hard decisions about how you spend that money. And there's a real need, I think, for philanthropic capital, or soft capital more generally, to start to commit to getting those systems in place. Did I answer your question, Ben?
Perfectly. And it sort of tees up the next question, which is, do you have any thoughts about the key trends or issues, learning agendas that are really driving investors these days in this context of climate adaptation and resilience?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason I know some of you folks in the audience here is because we all are sitting on half a dozen working groups around resilience metrics. So I think there's a real appetite for wanting to be able to talk about this with more rigor and with more vigor. There is a real appetite for wanting more clarity on what to be tracking and how, but not a lot of consolidation or real collaboration in how that process unfolds. So, I think this working group, for example, could be a really interesting space where we structure a conversation about how these actually play out in practice. And I mean, you know me, I'm very invested in learning agendas. I'm much happier to think about a structured conversation and a structured collaboration in which we consolidate these 25 frameworks into something that looks like a set of metrics that we can use as a baseline. Instead, what I see happening is just a multiplication of frameworks, and really a struggle from us on the investment side to keep up with all of those. The GIN does an admirable job of trying to keep track of this, but we could end up in a world in which there's 3,000 metrics that then again you have to sort of figure out what makes sense. It makes things difficult to compare, a lack of baseline. Let me double tap on the baseline problem, that a lot of these metrics are asking for sort of deltas, and what that delta requires as a baseline. And I can't tell you how many situations I've been in which it seems like stakeholders are expecting startups to actually establish that baseline. So, in Simon's case, somebody might say to him, well, how much is income improving? And Simon might say, well, I don't know what income was before. I reached this area with my product, and I can tell you maybe, what payouts were now or what income looks like now, but how would I know what income was like ahead of time? And it seems obvious and naive to articulate it, but it's a widespread problem. I think in a lot of the data poor kind of emerging markets that we're all focused on, who sets up those baselines? Who has that data? I think, in East Africa, we're fortunate that FinAccess gives us fairly robust baselines for a lot of this stuff. But having, I think, a more thorough, more collaborative, more learning-oriented conversation that allows us to arrive at standards and frameworks that make sense, rather than rushing to identifying those in a way that ends up being driven by theory, is a trend that I think deserves some consideration.
Powerful. You and I have often spoken, and indeed in the lead up to this meeting, we spoke a little bit about which organizations and stakeholders might be positioned and which might have constraints in articulating and promulgating these frameworks, and making sure that this kind of research not only gets done, but that it moves the needle and it sort of coordinates the conversation and reduces search costs in finding the right metrics for founders and practitioners. So with that in mind, what do you think about the space and where the ability to focus a conversation on a minimum set of metrics that meet those standards would come from?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly the right question. I don't think I have an answer for it. And frankly, at Catalyst Fund, thanks to support from organizations like as Patrick was mentioning, we've been able to do some of that work by having a philanthropic sidecar that accompanies the fund, that allows us to then work with our startups on some of this fundamental foundational pieces. But I think there's a real misunderstanding in the industry that early stage impact investors have these resources to set up those foundational pieces in the beginning. I mean, I think most of these, the structure of these funds, as you're talking about, I don't know, something like $50 to even $150 million under management with a 2% management fee. and you're probably running a 3 or 4 person investment team, what that means is that you have really no margin for these kinds of activities. And on top of that, you have a fiduciary duty that all of your activities be geared towards creating returns for LPs. So unless you're very, very confident that impact metrics and reportings are going to deliver growth and returns, this is not a responsible use of funds. So what that means is we need a lot more blended finance vehicles that can sort of do this work in the beginning, so that that underlying infrastructure and also commitment is built into these startups, so that when growth stage investors come around, you already have a sort of baseline of data, you have those structures in place. I don't think that there's nearly enough of those blended finance vehicle or creativity about how we set up those blended finance vehicles. So a lot of blended finance vehicles we're seeing are just like a sort of junior tranche or a mezzanine level in your fund, and that still fits within your sort of 2% management fee problem. It doesn't really unlock the ability to do this other kind of more impact-oriented work. So in a world in which sort of investment capital is driving development outcomes, I think there's a little bit of like coherence building work we need to do about how all of that research and data building work happens.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you for that. Before anything else happens, and I see we've got a question in the chat and a hand raised from Patrick, I just wanted to recognize our co-author and co-leader, Rashmi Jawahar, is on the line. Rashmi, if you're comfortable to come on video, we'd like to recognize all of the academic work that you've done, the field research, interviewing so many authors and so many thinkers in this space, and creating the great body of research that allowed us to sort of synthesize this redacted or summarized version of your working paper from last year. So Rashmi, thank you for joining us today. I'm sorry that our invitation to be on the panel arrived too late for you to get here with us and prepare for this talk with us. Why don't I give you the floor, if you want, for just a minute or two to tell us your reflections on the process of evaluating these frameworks, and then we'll get to Patrick and Nelly in that order.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Sorry, I joined in the middle, so I missed a little bit in the beginning of the session. But this exercise was incredibly interesting, going through all the frameworks, as diverse as they are. It was just fascinating to see the amount of work that various organizations have done. And at the same time, as Malika was talking about, I think from the SME or startup perspective, it's also very incredibly hard for them to use just one framework, considering the various resource requirements that they need to set up these kind of frameworks or even collect data. Hence, for me, yes, I mean, this was a great starting point, but I think as we go along, for me at least, for UNIDO, it's very important that we gain a lot of insights from the startups that we're supporting, especially climate adaptation and resilience. So we've developed a theory of change, and we're testing this. And I think based on the data that we'll be collecting from these startups, also I think we'll be able to come up with some insights and trends that we'd be happy to share with this group later on. So I can just say that it's a work in progress, and I'm just happy to be a part of this discussion and to learn as we go. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today, Rashmi, and thank you for all the incredible research that allowed us to get to this presentation today. Patrick, you're up.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I just wanted to pursue the thoughts that Malika shared towards the end of her intervention. We have spoken a lot about metrics at the level of companies, but Malika also made the point about the structure of blended finance, and I would like to note there that the incentive in running those financial structures currently isn't based on impact. No? Even the most committed fund managers, impact fund managers, they are, for most of them, rewarded on the basis of financial return. So is there a tension between financial return and impact return? Question mark. A good debate for us to have. Be this as it may, how nice would it be if some of their incentives, the carry, for example, would be a function of the impact that is created by the portfolio or the assets in the portfolio. And there again, Ben, we go back to that would be nice, of course, but we need a tool that is robust enough to calibrate that return. So back to the question of the metrics, and all the tools that we have and all the tools that we have reviewed at the moment are based on incidents. So we count the number of beneficiaries reached, if you want, but they are silent when it comes to the intensity. So how deep was the change? So how deep is the change that OCO is creating? How deep is the increased, the decreased vulnerability of the farmers because they have an insurance? And there, we don't have anything at this point, and this is what we need to not only equip the company, but also provide an incentive for those that are managing the money so that the focus is on impact as much as it is on returning the money.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question. I think there's maybe two parts to your question. I think one is like sort of how do we know that things are working and to what extent? And the second thing is like, how does that link to fund structures? So I think on the first thing, absolutely, we want to know what works and to what extent. The question is, who does that work and in what order of events? So, I think there's a handful of us on the call that come from a financial services background, and the way that worked for some of those early fintech funds was that there was a great body of academic work that we could use to answer the question about sort of yes or no, and what order of magnitude or what percentage, what delta should I expect, and that provided an underlying sort of academic foundation. And then we made investments, and we were then tracking things over time to sort of signpost along the way to see to what extent investments were following the predictions made by those academic findings or departing, and then creating an opportunity for course correction. And what I'm finding now in this climate adaptation space is there isn't that academic foundation. So when Simon talks about index insurance, you try and Google Scholar, or you talk to JPAL, what are the studies around index insurance? There is not a body of work there. Which means there's an opportunity to create it as OCO builds, as OCO's competitors build, frankly, to start to do these studies, to create that landscape, those signposts, those maps, to say what, theoretically, conceptually, we have good reason to be confident this is going to have sort of an impact outcome that's worth supporting, but to what extent and what kind of threshold should we be looking for, and what are the points of evidence we should be collecting? That's really an academic exercise. And I struggle with the notion that it should be startups creating that body of evidence. I don't think that they're the right stakeholder. I mean, forget about the poor incentives they have to be transparent about what that looks like, or to organize that kind of research. It's not their job, frankly. So I 100% agree with you that we need to know a yes or no, do we have impact or not? And then what's the magnitude we should really be expecting, and set up a sector that has all of that, that accompanying ecosystem. And that's when we talk about sort of ecosystem building, that the ventures and the founders are one piece of it, but that you need all these other pieces around it so that the whole sector flourishes in a way that delivers the benefits we all hope. And then, I mean, to your second question, yeah, I think that I wish there were ways we could be more creative about fund structure. I mean, we operate in sort of a limited world. That being said, I don't know that I'm so super comfortable with the notion that there's a trade-off between financial returns and impact returns. I think myself and the rest, the other investors on the line would say to you, like, what we're doing is picking businesses, and as sort of impact first or thesis-driven investors, we're picking businesses where financial returns are hand in hand, move in lockstep with impact returns, and that's precisely the job of a well-functioning impact investment team. But yeah, I'll stop there. I know I see Lily on the line and Lillian on the line. Like, both of them are also in the thick of this also.
There's no law that says only the panelists can speak. If Lily and Lillian have thoughts about what they'd like to contribute to the conversation, we can certainly open the floor. Nelly had a question for Marco, which I think sort of nicely ties the two publications together, asking whether we can learn anything about the OCO case study by situating it within the landscape, or sorry, the benchmark analysis of frameworks.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nelly, for the question. So trying to relate both publications, I would say that there are like several of the 10 key patterns that we can find into the OCO's case study. For instance, OCO studies the impact on end users that I mentioned before. OCO also track resource allocation, which is the pattern number 3, right? Because OCO reports financial resource allocation in the form of payouts, and ancillary metrics could include coverage limits and premiums. It also relates to the pattern number 4 that we found, which is balanced qualitative insights and quantitative data, because OCO reports back both measures. And OCO also conducts regular evaluation to understand the impact on its product on end users, and this can show, and this have shown how the product change the farmers' investment decisions and planting techniques. But I would ask Simon, how does he think about this this potential patterns relates to the work that OCO has been doing?
Yeah, to be honest, we didn't think in terms of these 10 patterns when we created our impact measurement. But I think it makes sense that it falls into the categories that you identified, because these are the kind of questions that investors and development organizations wants to have answers to. So yeah, there are tons of questions that we would like to answer, like how is the whole household impacted by our activity? How is the community around affected? If we change this or that, if we add this or that feature, how does it improve the impact we have? So it's an endless quest to measure the impact. But I think having the framework and so the work that you did to identify the different trends, if you can cover, I think what's important is not to focus on only one aspect of your impact, and use the framework to see what are the different categories of impact you can have, and then see which one are the most relevant and where diversify a bit your metrics. Yeah, so I think what we might do is go back to the framework that you've identified and the trend that you've identified to again check how we fit into those, and if there are things we're missing, things we could improve. So it's I think it's a work of back and forth between measuring the impact, checking how if it's giving a full picture, going back to the drawing board to see if there are more things we could measure, or things we are measuring twice that we can duplicate that we can remove. So I think your work and our work are interacting with each other.
It's nice that you point that out, because I think a case study is a much easier way to illustrate what we mean when we talk about sequencing the evidence base. The things that you do in your one-off impact evaluation are oftentimes very different to what you report on an annual or quarterly basis. And so in that way, it's really nice to have a case study that illustrates what does that mean to sequence evidence, and why do we measure different components of impact in different ways. We're very, very close to time. So Patrick, briefly, we have time for a little bit more, and then we need to thank our case study participants. We need to thank the CFAR Alliance. We need to thank our co-authors on the call. We need to thank our donors at Catalyst Fund that underwrote the case study work. So thank you for that. And the years-long collaboration with Patrick and Rashmi at UNIDO. Patrick, the floor is yours.
Just briefly trying to make justice to Nelly's first question. Nelly, I don't know the answer to this question. My hypothesis is that new companies are dealing with 1001 things that established companies don't have to deal with. They are working on their product market fit. They are establishing internal procedures. They are recruiting. They are doing fundraising, and impact thing comes on the top of all those extra things. So just sorry, Ben. Just wanted to make sure that we acknowledge and address Nelly's question, and thank you for engaging.
Thank you, Patrick.
Nelly, do you want any closing words? We're basically at time.
Just thanking everyone, thanking you guys for leading the collab. It's been an exceptional journey, and we are going to be sharing the recording. We're going to upload it in our website, and we're going to keep you posted for future Brownbacks. The next one is next week on smart agriculture with Graham Wright and MicroSafe Consulting and Wendy Chamberlain from Busara and CARE. It's going to be next Thursday, 9 a.m. East. So we're going to extend an invitation to all of you again. Thank you to the panelists, the organizers, the members of the collab, and our sponsors and members and allies of the CIFRA Alliance, and have a great rest of your day.
And not least our audience for joining us. Thank you for your time, everybody, and thank you for your thoughts. Have a good day.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye all.
Bye-bye. Thank
Thank
you.
you.